and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube video. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. On this video, we're going to be continuing my series through the role of female laity in the church, and particularly we're going to be continuing to look at this issue of women's suffrage, and today we're going to be looking at the topic of women on committees. So in our last video, we discussed how women are not to vote in the church, at least not in binding decisions that would determine the will of the congregation. Now the question is, are women permitted to sit on committees in the church? So if the church has some kind of congregational committee. Now I know there are some church bodies out there that don't believe congregations should have a committee. However, I do not see any biblical reason forbidding the use of church committees. In fact, when there is no pastor, there needs to be some sort of group that determines who the new pastor there is that they're going to call. Also, since the congregation normally has a collective church property and they're also putting together their collective church funds to go to collective charity missions and stuff like that, there should be some sort of a committee that is there to determine the will of the congregation, to determine how they are to handle their property, how they are to handle their expenses, what charities they're going to put their money into, and stuff like that. The church committees are not to deal with things like word and sacrament or the running of the liturgy and the divine service. That is meant to be handled by the clergy. However, there can be these lay committees that deal with the physical sides of the church. And the question is, can women sit on those committees? Now, the answer to this is actually twofold. The first thing is, I don't think a woman should ever have a position as a chairperson of a committee, because that is an authoritative position just by virtue of it being the chairperson, the leader of the committee. However, does this mean that the women can't have any role on the committee? Well, as we've established in our previous video, women are not to vote in the church because that would be an exercise of authority. However, this does not mean that women are forbidden from holding non-voting committee roles. For example, maybe a church has asked the woman to serve as a secretary for the church, note-taking, basically working as a kind of stenographer for the church committee. Now, if she does this, she's not to vote, and she's not to influence the committee meetings in any way that would impact the will of the congregation. But if she's serving in a simple, stenographer kind of position where she's just note-taking and record-keeping and stuff like that, then I see no reason why she could not do that. It's not a voting position, and it's not an authoritative position, it's simply note-keeping. A similar could be said in regards to the church treasurer. Now, the treasurer is merely the person that handles the money, that looks after the money, spends the money if the congregation wants it to be spent, and invests the money. Now, if the treasurer were to act and have some kind of liberty to act in an independent role of the congregation, then that is something that a woman should not do, because that would be an authoritative position. But if the treasurer is only to act on behalf of the will of the congregation and spend and save money and collect money based purely on the decisions of the committee, then a woman could hold that position. There is nothing wrong with the men of the congregating delegating certain tasks for women to do, as long as the women are not exercising any authority in that position. So if they're non-voting roles and they're non-authoritative roles, they're non-independent roles, they're simply just doing the work of the congregation at the direction of the congregation, then that is not a woman exercising authority in the church. So that would be my answer to this question as to whether women could serve on church committees. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.